talk about how when we're to submit to the authorities, that's referring to those who have been elected or appointed or conquered, meaning that legitimate or illegitimate, there's a submission to those authorities. Am I stating that correctly?
Yeah, it's a way of saying that the Jews of the first century and the Christians in the early days, they didn't much bother about whether somebody had been freely and fairly elected, because insofar as people had elections, they had elections in Rome from time to time, but it really didn't matter. Everybody knew that Caesar was it, and the petty officials beneath him would come and go. That wasn't the point. The point was God wants his world to be ordered and governed, and order and governance is better than anarchy and chaos. Therefore, you submit because you want to share God's project, which is of bringing wise order to the world. Back to Genesis 1, order, creation coming out of chaos. But along with that, goes constantly the responsibility of God's people to speak the truth to power. Back to what we were saying half an hour ago, the John 16 mandate of convicting the world of sin and righteousness and judgment. And that's not a matter of waiting for the next election and voting the other way next time. It's a matter of constant. And you see the church doing this in Acts. You see Paul doing it in Acts, where Paul, the Philippian magistrates tell him to get out of town, and he says, excuse me, Roman citizen, beaten without trial, imprisoned without charge. That's a public apology, by the way, and he gets it because they're scared. He knows his rights, and he's prepared to tell them when they've been out of line. He does the same with the high priest in Acts 23. And this, it seems to me, is a model of the way in which, even though Paul Paul would, as I've often said, would say boo to every goose and then all the swans as well. This is perhaps not the best way to win friends and influence people, and we don't all have the personality of Paul. But the model is correct, that the church is not to say, oh well, we won't vote for you next time. Then the church is to say, actually, here is the standard by which you really ought to be behaving, and you're getting this wrong right now. And the church better be careful, because it needs to know the ground it's standing on, and there may be a critique coming back as well. So before we launch this exocet into the public domain, let's make sure we've got our own house in order. But that isn't an excuse for hiding away until we're squeaky clean ourselves. We've got to embrace that mandate.
Speaking in truth to power, what role does the government have, or what is our role when the government outsteps its authority into other arenas, specifically in America, talking about gay marriage and abortion, but you can also talk about immigrants, you can talk about whatever issue that you have. What is our role then to, after speaking truth to power, the powers that be don't listen? Do
Well,
we submit?
okay.
How do we respond?
I mean, it's very interesting looking from the outside at the American situation, where you've got the same people wanting to have legislation that allows drunken 17-year-olds to own weapons-grade guns, and the same people who want to prevent young women who've been raped having abortions. There's something very bizarre about that, which tells me that actually the desire to legislate against abortion at all costs is not actually driven by the same thing that was driving the Jews and the early Christians to say that abortion was, because abortion was common in the ancient world. In the pagan world, people would often compel their wives to have abortions, which were very dangerous operations in the ancient world. But that was ruled out by the Jews and the Christians, just like they ruled out infanticide. You have a daughter that you don't want, throw her out. The Jews and the Christians didn't do that. Now, the fact that the Jews and Christians didn't do that was a witness to the society, and the society noticed. Now, the trouble is, in America at the moment, as in Britain in other ways, these things have all got bundled up, so that if you put a check by this thing on this side of the page, you're going to put a check by all those others, because that's what that party stands for. And then you're putting checks the other side in contradistinction to that. Most of these issues do not admit of such an easy categorization. So one of the things the church has to do is to articulate in the public square, by whatever means possible, wiser ways of thinking about the things that have become the so-called hot button issues. Now, I know that's not easy. I was in public life myself for several years as a bishop in the House of Lords and so on, saying things which are unpopular in that context. People don't like it, naturally. but the church has to be able to do that. And I remember speaking up in a debate in the House of Lords about the assisted dying question, the euthanasia bill. We have to be able to say things, to say this is the path of wisdom and that is the path of folly. And then if people don't listen, then we have to find ways of demonstrating that actually the way we're following is the wiser and healthier way for the human race.